The water is black before dawn breaks over Micronesia. Standing at the edge of a narrow tidal channel on the island of Pohnpei, the air carries the weight of something older than memory. Salt, wet basalt, and the faint mineral sharpness of stone that has not seen dry land in centuries. The mangrove roots claw at the waterline like fingers refusing to let go, and rising from the lagoon beyond them, dark and massive against the bruised sky, are walls. Not crumbling walls, not the romantic ruins of a civilization gracefully surrendering to time. These are walls built with an intention so deliberate, so geometrically precise, that the word ruin feels almost insulting. Stacked in alternating horizontal and vertical layers, a technique engineers call log cabin jointing. The basalt columns rise 6, 8, sometimes 10 meters above the tidal surface. Each column, hexagonal in cross-section, weighs between 5 and 50 tons. Some estimates push higher. There are 92 artificial islets here, spread across 18 square kilometers of open lagoon. They are connected by a network of canals, so deliberately engineered that early European explorers refused to believe what they were seeing. One Spanish captain, encountering the site in the 16th century, crossed himself and sailed away. The accepted scientific consensus places the construction of Nan Madol between 1200 and 1500 CE, attributing it to the Sodelur dynasty, a local ruling class who, according to oral tradition, simply appeared on these islands and commanded the sea itself to obey. The mainstream narrative is tidy, comfortable, and contained. But the stones tell a different story. Geological surveys of the basalt columns confirm that the nearest quarry source lies over 30 kilometers away, across open ocean, through unpredictable ethereal currents. No known technology available to a 12th century Micronesian society could have transported these megaliths. No timber and rope system, no canoe fleet, no human muscle. The engineering math does not resolve, which raises a question that mainstream archaeology has spent decades carefully avoiding. Who or what civilization actually built Nan Madol, and what were they capable of that we have not yet allowed ourselves to believe? The academic consensus on Nan Madol is, on its surface, reasonable. It is the kind of explanation that satisfies a curriculum deadline, ordered, attributed, and footnoted into respectability. According to mainstream archaeology, the complex was constructed beginning around 1200 CE by the Sodelur dynasty, a ruling class that unified the scattered chiefdoms of Pohnpei under a single theocratic authority. The name Nan Madol itself translates roughly from the Pohnpeian language as the space between, a reference to the canal network threading between the artificial islets. Scholars classify it as a ceremonial and administrative center, a seat of political power, a place of ritual, a royal mortuary complex where the bones of rulers were interred in coral-encased tombs. The construction method proposed by conventional archaeology is straightforward. Local populations, organized under the authority of the Sodelur rulers, allegedly quarried the basalt columns from volcanic formations on the main island and along the northern coastline of Pohnpei. These columns were then rafted across open water on bamboo platforms, guided by human paddlers, and stacked by coordinated labor gangs into the interlocking walls, still visible today. The project, according to this timeline, unfolded gradually over several centuries, a generational endeavor of communal will and religious devotion. It is a narrative that has been repeated in textbooks, UNESCO documentation, and archaeological journals for decades. Nan Madol was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016. The official designation describes it as an outstanding example of human ingenuity in a Pacific Island context. And yet, within that very designation, UNESCO itself quietly acknowledged something the textbooks rarely emphasize: that the site faces what they termed factors affecting the property, including the unresolved question of how construction was physically achieved, given the scale and remoteness of the materials involved. In other words, even the institution that canonized Nan Madol as a monument to human achievement admitted, in bureaucratic language carefully chosen to avoid alarm, that it cannot fully explain how the monument was built. That admission, buried in heritage documentation, is where the official narrative begins to fracture. And the fractures, as we will discover, run very deep indeed. Remove the institutional language, strip away the UNESCO designations and the peer-reviewed deference. Stand at the edge of the canal at low tide. Place your hand against one of these basalt columns and ask a single practical question. How did this get here? The hexagonal basalt prisms used throughout Nan Madol are not locally abundant. They are not scattered conveniently across the lagoon floor, waiting to be stacked. Geological analysis has traced the dominant stone type, a specific crystalline basalt with a distinctive mineral signature, to quarry sites located on the opposite side of Pohnpei, and instead to outcroppings on entirely separate islands within the Caroline Archipelago. The nearest confirmed primary source lies approximately 30 kilometers away, across open equatorial ocean. The columns range dramatically in size. The smaller pieces, manageable at 5 tons, might conceivably be moved by a sufficiently organized labor force using primitive rafts. But the largest recorded stones, embedded within the complex, exceed 50 tons. Some researchers place isolated foundation megaliths closer to 80 tons. For context, the stones used in the construction of Stonehenge average 25 tons, and the engineering required to move them remains a subject of active academic debate to this day. The bamboo raft hypothesis, the foundation of the mainstream transportation model, has never been successfully demonstrated at scale. Experimental archaeology attempts to replicate ancient construction techniques routinely. Egyptian obelisks have been dragged. Stonehenge lintels have been levered. Easter Island statues have been walked upright on ropes. No serious funded experiment has ever attempted to raft a 50-ton basalt column across 30 kilometers of open Pacific swell on bamboo. The reason, when stated plainly, is that the physics do not support survival of the attempt. There is also the question of volume. Nan Madol contains an estimated 750,000 metric tons of basalt in total, distributed across a construction timeline of 3 centuries. The most generous estimate mainstream archaeology allows. That requires the movement and precise placement of approximately 20,500 metric tons of stone every single year, without pause, without machinery, and across open ocean. No comparable structure built by a pre-industrial island society exists anywhere else in the Pacific, not in Polynesia, not in Melanesia, not in island Southeast Asia. Nan Madol does not belong to a regional tradition of megalithic construction. It appears in the archaeological record without precedent and without successor. That absence of context is not a footnote. It is the central anomaly that the official narrative has never resolved. And the deeper you push into the evidence, the more certain it becomes that the answer mainstream archaeology has provided is not an answer at all. It is a placeholder. There is a pattern that emerges when you study the great anomalies of ancient construction. Göbekli Tepe, the Giza Plateau, Puma Punku, the megalithic temples of Malta. Each site, when examined honestly, points not toward the gradual upward climb of human technological progress that modern academia has enshrined as orthodoxy, but toward something far more unsettling, the existence of a predecessor civilization operating at a level of sophistication that our current historical timeline simply does not accommodate. Nan Madol fits this pattern with uncomfortable precision. The oral traditions of Pohnpei do not describe the Sodelor dynasty as indigenous innovators who gradually mastered stonework over generations. They describe two brothers, Olisipa and Olosopa, who arrived by canoe from a distant land far to the west, a place the legends name but that no modern map recognizes. These brothers, according to the oral record, possessed the ability to move stones through the use of a flying dragon, a creature, or perhaps a technology, that lifted the megaliths through the air and placed them with precision no human hand could replicate. The mainstream academic response to this tradition has been to classify it as mythology, the inevitable supernatural embellishment that pre-literate societies attach to impressive construction projects. But consider an alternative reading. Across the ancient world, oral traditions consistently encode genuine historical memory within symbolic and supernatural language. The flying dragon of Pohnpeian tradition belongs to the same linguistic category as the Vedic Vimanas of ancient India, flying craft described in texts thousands of years old, and the thunderbirds of North American tradition that carried impossible burdens through the sky. These are not identical mythologies, but they share a structural grammar. The memory of a technology so far beyond the observer's frame of reference that the only available vocabulary was the supernatural. What if the builders of Nan Madol were not the Sodelur dynasty at all? What if the Sodelur were inheritors, a ruling class that occupied a site already ancient when they arrived, appropriating its authority and its mystery, while understanding neither its origin nor its true purpose? Geologist and independent researcher Nobuhiro Yoshida, along with a number of Pacific archaeologists working outside the institutional mainstream, has proposed that Nan Madol sits atop the remnants of a far older civilization, one connected not only to the Pacific but to a network of megalithic sites spanning the globe, linked by a shared and as yet unnamed technological tradition. A civilization that preceded the accepted timeline of organized human society by thousands of years. A civilization that, for reasons we have not yet fully determined, disappeared, leaving only its stones behind. Those stones, it turns out, have more to say than anyone in an official capacity has been willing to hear. The most significant evidence surrounding Nan Madol does not sit above the waterline. It lies beneath it. In the 1990s, a team of Japanese researchers conducting underwater surveys in the lagoon surrounding the complex documented something that received almost no coverage in mainstream archaeological publications, beneath the tidal channels threading between the artificial islets. At depths ranging from 3 to 8 meters, they identified what appeared to be structural foundations. Stone formations arranged with a deliberate geometric regularity as the walls above the surface, not natural basalt outcroppings, not random debris shed from the islets over centuries of tidal erosion. Organized subsurface architecture, extending the visible footprint of the complex downward into the seabed, in a manner consistent with foundations laid when the lagoon floor was dry land. If accurate, this single observation carries a staggering implication. For the lagoon floor to have been dry land at the time of original construction, Nan Madol, or at least its foundational layer, would need to have been built during a period when regional sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. The last time Pacific sea levels were sufficiently low to expose that lagoon floor as habitable terrain was during or immediately following the last glacial maximum, a period ending approximately 10 to 12,000 years ago. That would place the original construction of Nan Madol not in the 12th century CE, but somewhere in the range of 10 to 12,000 years before the present. Deep prehistory, before the invention of writing, before the rise of Mesopotamia, before Egypt, before every civilization that mainstream history recognizes as foundational to the human story. This finding was not refuted. It was not debunked by a competing study. It was absorbed into institutional silence, mentioned in obscure conference proceedings, noted in a handful of fringe publications, and then effectively disappeared from the academic conversation. The stones themselves corroborate the timeline in a different way. Lichenometric dating, a technique that estimates surface age based on the growth rates of lichen colonies colonizing exposed rock, has been applied informally to sections of Nan Madol's outer walls. The results consistently suggest surface exposure ages far exceeding the 1200 CE construction date. Lichen does not lie. It grows at known, measurable rates, and the colonies present on certain basalt faces at Nan Madol suggest those surfaces have been exposed to open air for not hundreds of years, but potentially thousands. The legends extend the evidentiary trail further still. Across Micronesia, Marshall Islands' oral tradition, and the broader corpus of Western Pacific mythology, there are consistent references to a sunken land, a drowned civilization of great cities and stone towers that slipped beneath the ocean in a catastrophic inundation long before living memory. The Pohnpeian name for this lost world is Kanimwaiso. Other traditions call it simply the land beneath the water. The structural consistency of these accounts across cultures separated by thousands of kilometers of open ocean is not coincidental folklore. It is convergent memory, independent cultural records of the same catastrophic event encoded in different symbolic languages. Nan Madol, by this reading, is not a monument to the Sodelur dynasty. It is a survivor's remnant, the above water portion of a far larger complex built by a civilization that predated the Great Inundation, constructed on ground that was dry when human hands first shaped these stones, and now half submerged by the same rising seas that erased the world those hands belonged to. The evidence for this interpretation exists. It has been documented, it has been measured, and it has been, with remarkable consistency, set aside. The word cover-up carries an accusatory weight that serious inquiry should handle carefully. What the evidence surrounding Nan Madol reveals is not necessarily a coordinated conspiracy of dark-roomed men pressing dangerous knowledge. It is something subtler, and in many ways more troubling. A systematic institutional bias so deeply embedded in the architecture of academic archaeology that inconvenient evidence is not actively buried so much as it is quietly starved of oxygen until it suffocates. Understanding how this works requires understanding the economy of academic legitimacy. Archaeological funding, publication access, and professional credibility all flow through the same narrow institutional channels. Universities, government heritage bodies, and internationally recognized organizations, such as UNESCO and the Smithsonian Institution. A researcher who produces findings consistent with the accepted timeline receives grants, peer-reviewed publication, conference invitations, and career advancement. A researcher who produces findings that fundamentally challenge the accepted timeline faces a different outcome entirely. Their methodology is scrutinized beyond standard threshold. Their conclusions are framed as fringe. Their access to funding quietly closes. This is not conspiracy. It is institutional self-preservation, operating exactly as institutional self-preservation always operates. By rewarding conformity and marginalizing disruption, the Japanese underwater survey team that documented subsurface foundations beneath Nan Madol's lagoon operated outside the primary Western academic infrastructure. Their findings were published in Japanese language geological journals with limited international circulation. No Western-funded follow-up expedition was commissioned. No major archaeological institution dispatched a dive team to verify or refute the findings with modern sonar and photogrammetric mapping technology. Technology that has since been used extensively at far less anomalous underwater sites around the world. The silence was not accidental. Verification would have forced a confrontation with implications that the institutional framework was not prepared to absorb. The pattern repeats across the broader landscape of Pacific archaeology. Graham Hancock, the investigative journalist who brought many of these anomalies to wider public attention, was denied access to present findings at mainstream academic forums, not because his evidence was systematically disproven, but because engaging with it at all risked lending it credibility. Robert Schoch, the Boston University geologist whose water erosion analysis of the Sphinx pushed its construction date back by thousands of years, faced coordinated professional resistance from Egyptological institutions for decades. Not through counter-evidence, but through the strategic withholding of platform. The Vatican's role in Pacific historical suppression is less direct, but no less significant. Catholic missionaries who arrived in Micronesia during the 16th and 17th centuries were the primary conduit through which indigenous oral traditions were first recorded in writing and selectively edited. Traditions that described pre-Christian civilizations of advanced capacity were systematically reframed as myth, stripped of their historical content, and reclassified as spiritual allegory. The original Pohnpeian oral accounts of Nan Madol's construction were filtered through missionary transcription that had every theological incentive to render the impossible mundane and the ancient recent. What was lost in that translation was not merely linguistic nuance. What was lost was the historical memory of an entire civilization, reduced to a dragon story, filed under folklore and shelved. Pause here. Step back from the individual anomalies, the impossible tonnage, the submerged foundations, the silenced researchers, the oral traditions, and consider what the cumulative weight of this evidence demands if taken seriously. If Nan Madol was originally constructed 10 to 12,000 years ago by a civilization possessing technological capabilities that our current historical framework does not account for, then the foundational assumption underlying every archaeology textbook, every museum exhibition, and every public school curriculum about the origins of human civilization is not incomplete. It is wrong. The accepted model of human development follows a clean, linear arc. Stone Age, subsistence, agricultural revolution, Bronze Age complexity, Iron Age expansion, and the eventual flowering of literate urban civilization in Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley, roughly 5,000 years ago. Everything before that threshold is classified as prehistory, a long twilight of hunter-gatherer simplicity, from which organized human achievement only gradually emerged. This model is not merely an academic framework. It is the foundational story that modern civilization tells itself about its own origins, its own uniqueness, its own trajectory. Nan Madol, if properly dated and properly understood, ruptures that story at its root. A civilization capable of quarrying, transporting, and precisely placing 750,000 metric tons of basalt across open ocean, operating potentially 12 millennia ago, was not a primitive society making its first tentative steps toward complexity. It was an advanced society, one that had already solved engineering problems that challenged our own civilization well into the industrial era. Its existence implies predecessors. It implies a developmental arc that preceded our own by thousands of years. It implies that the catastrophic inundation at the end of the last ice age, a real, documented, geologically verified event that raised global sea levels by over 100 meters, did not merely reshape coastlines. It erased civilizations. Entire worlds of accumulated human knowledge, architectural tradition, and technological sophistication were swallowed by rising water, leaving only the highest and most durable remnants above the surface. Nan Madol may be one of those remnants, and if one such remnant exists in the Pacific, the logical extension of that conclusion is profound. Others exist elsewhere, beneath the Persian Gulf, which was dry land 12,000 years ago, beneath the South China Sea, beneath the submerged continental shelves of India, where structures off the coast of Dwarka have been identified at depths consistent with post-glacial inundation. The ocean floor is not an empty archive. It is, potentially, the most significant archaeological site on Earth, and it remains almost entirely unexamined. The paradigm shift demanded by Nan Madol is therefore not merely archaeological. It is civilizational. It requires that humanity reconsider not only its past, but its understanding of what human beings are capable of, and how completely that capability can be erased when the physical record of its existence is submerged beneath 100 meters of ocean. History, it turns out, may not begin where we were told it begins. It may simply be where the water ends. The sun sets over Pohnpei in shades of amber and deep violet. And the lagoon surrounding Nan Madol does what it has done for longer than any sanctioned history acknowledges. It holds its silence with the patience of something that has already outlasted every explanation offered for its existence. The tidal channels fill slowly as the light fails. The basalt walls darken from gray to black, their surfaces slick with the thin film of water that never fully leaves them. Somewhere beneath the canal floor, under silt accumulated across millennia, those subsurface foundations sit in the same geometric precision they were placed in, by hands whose civilization has no name in any textbook, whose language left no decipherable inscription, whose tools left no inventory in any museum case. They built in stone because stone endures. Perhaps they understood, with a clarity born of watching their world begin to flood, that the water was coming and that only the heaviest things would remain to speak for them. They were correct. The water came. The world they built above the waterline persists, massive and inexplicable, against every reasonable expectation of survival. And the world they built below the waterline waits, patient, undisturbed, and largely uninvestigated, for the moment when human curiosity finally overpowers institutional comfort. What is most striking about Nan Madol, standing at its edge in the failing light, is not its scale, though. The scale is staggering. It is not the precision, though the precision defies simple explanation. It is the feeling, difficult to articulate, but impossible to dismiss, that this place was not built for the people who eventually came to occupy it. It was built for duration. It was built to be found. Every deliberate joint, every carefully oriented column, every canal cut with geometric intention through the living lagoon floor reads less like architecture and more like a message composed in the only language guaranteed to survive catastrophe: mass, weight, and stone. The question is not whether a lost civilization built Nan Madol. The physical evidence, examined without the distorting lens of institutional orthodoxy, makes that conclusion increasingly difficult to avoid. The question, the one that should compel every archaeologist, every historian, every human being with genuine curiosity about the depth of our own story, is what else they built. What else lies beneath the water that swallowed their world? What other messages, composed in basalt and coral and volcanic stone, are resting on ocean floors we have not yet thought to read? Nan Madol does not ask to be believed. It simply stands. It has been standing since before the first dynasty of Egypt drew its first breath, before the first cuneiform mark was pressed into Mesopotamian clay, before the story we call civilization was anywhere near its beginning. It will be standing long after our own certainties have dissolved. The lagoon remembers. The only question remaining is whether we are finally ready to listen.